Welcome back to Turning Hard Times to Good Times. I am your host, Jay Taylor, and I'm really to have with me today my surprise guest that I mentioned I would have a surprise guest last week, Daniel McAdams, the Executive Chairman of the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity. We used to have Daniel on quite often, but as I had to sort of focus on, with only a one-hour show, I had to sort of focus on more directly on the mining sector and on economics. Haven't had him on nearly as often as I'd like because I think in terms of keeping track of what's going on in the world, what's really going on as opposed to the propaganda you hear from the mainstream media, Daniel McAdams and the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity can provide insights that you otherwise would not have. Daniel is executive, as I mentioned, he's the executive director of Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity, and he served as foreign affairs advisor to Congressman Paul during from 2001 until his retirement in 2012. In the 1990s, Daniel worked as a journalist based in Budapest, Hungary, including an editorial page editor. He was editorial page editor of the Budapest Sun. Daniel also served as special rapporteur for the British Helsinki Human Rights Group while based in Europe, monitoring human rights and elections on the ground in various contentious states, including Albania during the 1996-1998 civil unrest, Montenegro, Georgia, Romania, Belarus, Croatia, and Slovakia. He was a Phillips Foundation journalism fellow from 1998 to 2000 and an American Swiss Foundation Young Leader in 2006. He has a bachelor's degree in English from University of California at Berkeley and completed coursework for a master's in international relations. I consider Daniel a good friend, and he is, and he used, as I said, used to be a much more frequent guest on this show, but given the logistics and time parameters, he's not been on with us nearly as often as I like, but today I'm really glad that he's with us. Thanks, Daniel, for joining us today.
Hey, Jay, thanks for having me back. It's great to be with you again.
Oh, it's just great to have you. Let me ask you, I know that you and Ron are not big Donald Trump fans. I think that goes pretty much without saying for some pretty good reasons, actually. But are there any areas during the first 2 years of Trump's presidency that are worthy of compliment, if not praise, from you and Ron?
Well, the one thing about President Trump is, he's such a polarizing figure, and that can be a good thing or a bad thing. But unfortunately, he polarizes people to the extent, Jay, that they don't stop and think about the policies. Yeah. It's his detractors on the left. They hate him because he has orange hair and he's a racist and this and that. They never talk about what he does. And of course, a lot of Republicans feel the same way because he's not from the swamp. He may not have done a great job draining the swamp so far, but he's not from the swamp, and he challenges a lot of the things that they hold sacred. So it's he's a polarizing figure, but people don't stop to think about the policies.
Yeah, well, that he is, and there's so much emotion and so little willingness to listen to anybody else's views, and it's just I've never seen anything as crazy as this in my long lifetime here as an observer and a voter. One of the appealing views of Donald Trump for me, and frankly one of the reasons that I voted for him, was a less aggressive military presence around the world, and his views that NATO was no longer needed. Those were ideas that were very appealing to me, and I thought not a lot different from what your boss, Ron Paul, would have said when he was on the campaign trail. To what extent do you think he is trying to make good on those general themes, and to what extent do you think the military-industrial complex actually is throttling him and keeping him from doing so?
Yeah, Jay, he was great on the trail on so many things, not just that, but he's the first person on the national stage, aside from Dr. Paul, to say, hey, the Iraq War was a total mistake. It was a botched thing. The neocons were behind it. They're a bunch of liars. It was just a terrific thing. He even, just criticized it to their face, and that was tremendous. Mm-hmm. So he was terrific on the campaign trail. Hey, what's wrong with getting along with Russia? You couldn't even say that nowadays for fear of being put in Guantanamo, but because of the way things have gone. But what is wrong with getting along with countries? That's the whole should have been the peace dividend of the end of the Cold War, Jay. We don't have to spend all this money. So So you're asking to what extent, as president, has he followed through? Not as much as we would have liked. There are some promising signs, some things I think that we could give credit for, but some things that we have to criticize. And one of the things that I find most surprising, because he is full of self-confidence, he's a big developer, a big real estate guy, a lot of confidence. But when it comes down to it, he doesn't seem to have a lot of authority. He doesn't seem to follow through. He seems to be almost a little bit timid, Jay, when he does things in practice. And we wonder about this. Why is he this way? And we have to just think that maybe, the world of business and the world of politics is very different. And it's the issue of power and authority. He has the authority to change things in Washington. He has the authority to drain the swamp, but he doesn't have the power. And I think if he were joining us on the line and being honest, he might admit that this is the thing that surprised him, having the authority but not the power.
He doesn't have the political power, for example, on the issue of building the wall. And I don't know where you and Ron stand on that, but the whole idea of the declaring an emergency with Mexicans or with various foreigners coming in over the walls, protecting the sovereignty of the country. People admit that he has the legal authority to do so, but he probably doesn't have the political power to do so. Is that the kind of thing you're talking about?
That kind of thing, yeah, of course. And, Dr. Paul has always been against walls, but he doesn't dispute the necessity of protecting the border. He thinks there's a better way, but certainly that's exactly right. Remember, it was last spring, it was spring of 2018, that President Trump, gathered his people together and said, hey, I want to get out of Syria. I want to get out of Afghanistan. I want to get us out of there. And they said, what are you talking about? We can't do that. Forget it. Let's give us a little time. Let's don't be hasty. And that's when, of course, they tricked him into the bombing of Syria, this phony gas attack that never happened. Certainly was not done by the government of Syria. They did as much as they could. They had all kinds of tricks in their playbook to delay it. And then finally he was frustrated in December and said, look, we are getting out. And he said it publicly instead of just to his aides. And then you had the people that work for him, Jay. You had John Bolton and Pompeo go over to the Middle East and say, don't worry, we're not getting out. And, the guy's crazy. Can you imagine doing that to a boss, to the person you answer to? It's shocking. It's shocking. So, no power.
I'm sure people didn't get away with that with Trump when he was, in his real estate business.
Exactly. He wouldn't have been successful, as he was.
Now, speaking of Russia, the whole notion of Russia being such a threat to us, and what seems ironic to me, Daniel, is that Hillary Clinton, when she was Secretary of State, approved the sale of uranium to Vladimir Putin's Russia. The United States has to import, something like 98% of its uranium now, something like that. Anyway, so we need 55 million pounds a year for our power plants. We get 20% of our electricity from nuclear power. We need uranium for nuclear-powered submarines, and we have to import most of it. The Clinton Foundation reaped a windfall, something like $142 million. It needed Hillary Clinton's signature on it. And yet, it would seem as if that act alone would suggest collusion with Russia much more than anything that we've ever heard about Trump. And yet, what's your take on this? I mean, it doesn't make a lot of sense if you're looking at this thing objectively, it seems to me.
It's amazing, and I don't think anyone would be shocked by hearing that the Clintons have got to be among the most corrupt people in history. And I don't think it was even ideological with her. I think it was just about the money. Because look at her. Yeah, look at her tough talk about terrorism and this and that. But then here you have the Clinton Foundation happily receiving money from all of these Gulf states that were at the same time bankrolling Al Qaeda in Syria. So it's definitely about, you're right, money and power and prestige. Certainly not about philosophy or ideology. It's just pure corruption.
Yeah, and then when she lost the election, of course, most of this foreign money went away. There were no more cash flows into the Clinton Foundation from foreign governments after after she lost the election. So, I mean, none of that seems to be raised in the mainstream media, but boy, just doesn't make any sense to me. Well, we're going to have this. My next guest is a fellow from India, Jayant Bhandari, and his views with regard to pulling out of these various countries. Well, we're going to hear what he has to say, but it's my understanding that he, sort of doesn't want to see us pull out too fast. Now, this is Jayant. I know is a libertarian. He believes in he thinks America's power should be limited, and it's much more extensive than it should be. But do you have any concerns? Does Dr. Paul have any concerns? Let's say tomorrow we did what Ron Paul wanted to do when he was running for president. Let's just go home. Let's send everybody home. Would there not be a vacuum around the world? Would there not be some other bad actors moving into some of these countries?
Well, unfortunately,
and would that matter that much? What's that?
Well, we are the bad actor. I mean, unfortunately, we are the bad actor. The United States is illegally occupying Syrian territory. We have absolutely no legal authority to be in Syria. And in fact, our presence in Syria, our presence in Iraq, our presence in these countries, as is admitted even by the government, even by government officials, our very presence there motivates people to become jihadists, motivates them to radicalize. And, Robert Pape, the professor at the University of Chicago, had a famous book, Dying to Win, where he did a painstaking analysis of suicide terrorism, and it's motivated in the vast majority of cases, vast majority of cases, by the feeling like you're occupied by a foreign power. Mm-hmm. So we are creating terrorism, we are creating terrorists by having the U.S. military involved in these countries, by having the CIA meddling in their politics, overthrowing their governments. I would agree, if you characterize your next guest's views accurately, I would agree with him. We should definitely be engaged in these countries, but not with troops and weapons and guns. And mm-hmm. we should stop sanctioning countries and send over businessmen and students and tourists. We should be at least as engaged as we are now, but in a different way, in a libertarian, in a pro-peace, in a pro-prosperity way.
Well, I guess endless wars are good for somebody. Your Washington establishment is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. The parasites are draining the middle class in America very dramatically, it would seem. So I guess there's probably a good reason and an explanation as to why we have endless wars, right?
Just follow the money. That's all you have to do. The think tanks that are promoting war, look at who their donors are. They are by and large 80%, I would say, are either U.S. government entities or the military-industrial complex. Lockheed Martin, the other companies that make a fortune off of war, they probably spend $1 on a think tank and they get $1 million back in a bomb. So it's mm-hmm. a good investment from their perspective, but it's bad for America and it's not making us safer.
It's bad for humanity. It's certainly not consistent with what our founders had in mind. That's for sure. Daniel, just with about a minute left here, Syria. Are we going to get out of there? Is Trump going to have his way, or will there be another bomb or something going off here that keeps it from happening?
Well, we will get out of Syria. That train has left the station. However you want to slice it, we will be out of there. The U.S. is only causing more problems. There's no mission left for the U.S. in Syria. Whether Trump likes it or not, the U.S. military will be out of Syria soon.
Well, we'll have to see how that plays out. It's very interesting times, Daniel, and I should tell our listeners it's ronpaulinstitute.org, ronpaulinstitute.org. Daniel, you almost every day with Dr. Paul there, aren't you, on a video and a discussion, some topic of the day that you talk about there?
Yes, the Ron Paul Liberty Report is live streamed on YouTube. Our channel, Ron Paul Liberty Report, every day at noon Eastern Time, every weekday at noon Eastern Time.
Well, I really would suggest our listeners go there and learn about what's really happening globally in the geopolitical realm, because it's not what you're hearing on the mainstream media, I dare say. Daniel, thank you so much for being with us, and we need to do it more often, no question about it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jay.